Hello everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. In our last episode, we saw that the Queen Mother tried to keep up her usual engagements, but was forced to cancel some because of bad weather or ill health. She didn't like it if she was forced to stay home, and she felt she should be doing something. She loved her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and she said she learned from them and enjoyed them, even though she didn't always agree with what they had to say. Then there was a celebration of EE Day, and it was the 50th anniversary, and everybody celebrated. It was a joyous time for the royal family, too. So let's see what's going on today. While the Queen Mother was at Sandringham after Christmas, another member of the family, Rachel, who was the widow of her much-loved brother David, died. The roads weren't able to be traveled on because of the snow and ice, and the Queen Mother couldn't get to St. Paul's Walden for the funeral. She sent a loving letter to her nephew Simon, talking about her mother's brave spirit, her courage, her humor, and her great loving kindness. She said, "I know that when my heart fails me, I shall hear Rachel saying, 'Come on now, don't give up.'" On February the 6th, the anniversary of the King's death, Queen Elizabeth celebrated Holy Communion as usual at the Royal Chapel in Windsor, Great Park. She got a heartening letter from the former chaplain of the Royal Chapel, the Reverend Anthony Harbottle, a devout and kindly man who served with the Royal Marines during the war. He also collected butterflies and moths, and he became close to the royal family, but particularly to the Queen Mother, throughout his time as chaplain from 1968 to 1981. In 1972, on the 20th anniversary of the King's death, she wrote to tell him that the family had all thought his sermon was perfect. In February 1982, the first year after he had ceased to be chaplain, she wrote to tell him how much they missed his sympathy and understanding at the service. Every year after that, Harbottle would write to the Queen Mother on the anniversary of the King's death, and every year she would reply. The Queen Mother loved the prayer book. She didn't like such newfangled ideas as the kiss of peace or even the handshake. When she saw it winging its way toward her, she stiffened and took evasive action. Her religion was loving kindness, and that was according to her friend, Lord St. John of Fawsley. In 1996, Queen Elizabeth was cheered by the state visit of President Nelson Mandela to London following South Africa's readmission to the Commonwealth. He came to tea with her at Clarence House on July the 9th, and she then attended the state banquet in his honor. She marveled at the change that Mandela had peacefully brought about, and dared for the first time in decades to be hopeful about the beloved country. On July 18th, she met with the Dalai Lama. He was the exiled spiritual leader of Tibet. The meeting took place at a complex time, just 1 year before Hong Kong was due to revert from British rule to China. The Chinese government was always sensitive to criticism of its human rights record in Tibet. The day before, Chinese officials had attacked a cross-party group of British politicians for inviting the Dalai Lama to address members of the Lords and Commons. Their actions, said a Chinese foreign ministry spokesman, will have an adverse effect on the Sino-British relationship. And this was the first time that the exiled Tibetan leader had been received by a member of the royal family. The Tibetan spiritual leader explained to the Queen Mother that as a boy in Tibet, he had seen newsreels and pictures of her and the king in bombed-out London and had wanted to meet her ever since. The Dalai Lama was captivated by the charm of the Queen Mother, and when he left, he took her hand and placed it to his bowed forehead, a mark of sincere respect and affection. Years later, the Dalai Lama mentioned the meeting in speeches and interviews. He had been impressed by Queen Elizabeth's optimistic view of the world and of improvements that she had witnessed during the 20th century. "I was deeply impressed and inspired by her," he said. Her optimism reinforced his own, and he was further encouraged when Prince Charles inherited and expanded his grandmother's interest in the plight of Tibet. At the Sandringham Flower Show in late July that year, Queen Elizabeth arrived in a carriage with Prince Charles. They then toured the stalls together in her golf buggy. Ted Hughes, who was again among her guests, captured it all in another poem called "The Prince and His Granny." And the second of the 5 verses ran, "The police brass band, they puffed and frowned to turn their duty into sound. They woke the flowers and the flowers swooned to meet the gaze of the prince and his granny." Then, hearing the bees boom, "Taste our honey," the lemon curd and the marmalade rose from the stalls, no matter who paid, and joined in the joys of the royal parade. The Queen Mother was thrilled and delighted by it. She told him, first she said the prince himself read it to his granny very nicely, and then she read it herself again and again. He had invoked lovely memories, she said, and she ended by sending an immense amount of gratitude from the prince's granny, Elizabeth R. A disagreeable occurrence for her in 1996 was publicly over the size of her overdraft, which suddenly hit the headlines. £4 million, the paper said. And they said that she was extravagant and lived beyond her means, and had always been assumed how could any retired person, even a queen, pay for so many homes, horses, staff, and dresses. Her finances were managed by Ralph Anstruther until he fell ill and was replaced by his treasurer by Nicholas Ashton, the former deputy chairman of Coutts. She had a passbook from Coutts that would be brought by hand every quarter, written up by hand, and detailing all her personal checks. Most of them were to dressmakers and those close friends whom she helped. Her racing account was still looked after by Michael Oswald. There were inevitable financial shortfalls even after her civil list annuity rose, eventually to £643,000 to cover her expenses. The Queen had elected always to cover her mother's racing losses and other expenses, and thus enabled her to continue the style of life to which she was both accustomed and suited. Her expenditure would have been reduced if she had not been determined, despite her age, to continue leading a remarkably active public and private life. In 1997, she carried out 54 public engagements and many private ones. In early February, there was an enjoyable family weekend at Royal Lodge for the christening of her great-grandson, Samuel Chatto, the son of Princess Margaret's daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Daniel. Lord Snowdon was there for the christening and lunch, and she made sure that he sat next to her. Throughout the year, she carried out her engagements, both public and personal. After Prince Charles and the Queen Mother went to the King's Lynn Festival, he wrote to her afterwards, "I still can't believe that another year has passed, and that once again we have walked round the flower and vegetable tent at Sandringham, talked to all those hearty annual people in the crowd, and sung Cole Porter songs after dinner with Raymond Leopard. As always, everything was a very special treat because it was with you." She was at Clarence House for her birthday lunch, before which the King's troop of the Royal Horse Artillery paraded by in her honor. And this year she invited Prince William and Prince Harry and their father. The Queen Mother left as usual for the Castle of May on August the 7th, and it was a sad moment when Britannia made her last visit to May. The Conservative government of John Major decided to decommission the royal yacht, and this decision was confirmed by the new Labour leader led by Tony Blair. Their yacht had been an effective seaborne embassy and trade platform for Britain for over 40 years, as well as being the family's floating haven, both when they were promoting Britain and when they were taking holidays. Britannia anchored off Caithness for the last time August 16, 1997. The Queen came ashore to May, leading a large family party, which included Prince Andrew and his daughters, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, Princess Anne and her husband, her children Peter and Zara, Prince Edward and his friend Sophie Rees-Jones, whom he married in June 1999, and Prince Margaret's son and daughter, David Lindley and Sarah Chatto, with their spouses. Lunch that day was fun but melancholy. That autumn, the Queen and many members of the family attended the decommissioning of the Britannia at Portsmouth. Queen Elizabeth did not go. As with other aspects of her life she considered disagreeable, she turned away from the subject. Her friends and household knew not to mention the yacht to her again. When she left May, she spent the last weekend of August, as usual, at Balmoral before moving on to Birk Hall. That weekend, on the night of 31st of August, disaster happened. The Princess of Wales was killed in a car crash in Paris. Her drunken driver had been speeding to escape an insistent swarm of press photographers. In the early hours of Sunday morning, August 31st, The Queen wrote her mother a note to be given to her when she woke up, telling her about the tragedy. At Balmoral, everyone's first concern was for Prince William and Prince Harry. Fortunately, they were there with their father and the rest of the family, all of whom rallied to help them in different ways. But time to cope with shock and loss were not permitted to any of them. This at once became a national tragedy, and the tone was set by Prime Minister Tony Blair, who a few hours after her death eulogized the Princess of Wales as the people's princess. And there was a great outpouring of grief across the country, and it intensified throughout the week. This was a remarkable testimony to the princess's popularity, but some of it was self-indulgent, and passions were inflamed by non-stop broadcasting of events and shrill demands from tabloid papers. "Show us you care," one front page screamed at the Queen. Whether intentionally or not, such attacks upon the monarch helped deflect public attention from the fact that the princess had died in a flight from press harassment. The Queen was in the center of the family, as well as the center of the press storm. The family was stunned by this extraordinary, sometimes angry outpouring of emotion. At the castle, Robin Javrin, who was now the Queen's deputy private secretary, calmly helped navigate a course through all the swirling cross-currents. At the end of an agonizing, perplexing week, the Queen, Prince Philip, Prince Charles, and his sons flew down to London. They talked to the people in the crowds outside the palaces. The Queen then made a live television broadcast in which she spoke as both Queen and grandmother of her admiration for the Princess of Wales and her gratitude that people had shown how much they cared. Queen Elizabeth also flew down to London on September 5th for the funeral on Saturday, September 6th. She returned to Birk Hall immediately afterwards to rejoin friends who had already been invited to stay. Characteristically, she said very little about it to her guest, and a few days later, Princess Margaret wrote to her sister to express my loving admiration of you, how you kindly arranged everybody's lives after the accident and made life tolerable for the two poor boys. There, always in command, was you, listening to everyone and deciding on all the issues. I just felt you were wonderful. But the public reaction to the death of the princess brought home to many observers how much had changed in Britain since the death of King George VI, and how hard it was for the monarchy to keep pace with these changes. It was, and it remained later, difficult to define just what the widespread display of emotion meant. The constitutional historian Vernon Bogdanor was that it showed, although the British were monarchical people, they wanted a demystified monarchy, in touch with their needs, a practical monarchy, that is, in effect, another way of describing the welfare monarchy, represented by the work that Queen Elizabeth did throughout her life for her charities and other patronages. Life at Birk Hall had to continue, and on September the 8th, Queen Elizabeth flew to Fort George in Inverness-shire to visit the 1st Battalion. The Black Watch, the first, marked the 60th anniversary of her appointment as Colonel-in-Chief of the regiment, and the next few weeks the Prince of Wales brought his sons to stay with her twice at Birk Hall. After that, Queen Elizabeth returned to London, and her winter program was less difficult than it had been in the past, and as usual, she visited the Field of Remembrance at St. Margaret's, Westminster, on November the 7th, and she went to the Royal Smithfield Show at Earl's Court, November 27th, and in fine form attended the Middle Temple Family Night Dinner on December the 4th. So I will end the video here. In this episode, we saw the Queen Mother doing her engagements as usual, and during this time she got together with Nelson Mandela and the Dalai Lama at different moments. And it was around this time she saw the end of the Britannia, a ship that had been used for around 40 years. The Queen and many members of the family attended the decommissioning of Britannia at Portsmouth, and Queen Elizabeth did not go. She did that with a thing she couldn't face. Everyone that knew her knew better than to bring up the subject again. We also got to that terrible moment in time when Princess Diana died. It was a shock to everyone, and the press stirred up the public and demanded the royal family show that they cared. The Queen handled it all with great wisdom and wanted to hear from everyone in deciding what needed to be done. Her sister, Princess Margaret, was very proud of her and how she handled everything. So the next episode, we're going to be wrapping up the story of the Queen Mother, and I'm going to be sad to leave her. I know it seems like we've been on the subject for quite a while. I'm surprised how long it's taken, but when you look at the book itself, it was a gigantic book because she did live such a long life, and I'm glad that she did live a long life because it's been very interesting. She is truly a remarkable lady, and I'm so glad that she decided to marry the Duke of York, Prince Albert, who was later to become King George VI. There could have been no better wife or queen. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. More importantly, I want to wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.